It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I first felt the cracks in our seemingly perfect life. My wife, Amanda, had been distant lately, her once warm smiles replaced by perfunctory nods, and her evenings claimed by vague excuses. "It's just work stress," she'd say, and I would nod, convincing myself that we all have our seasons of strain. Amanda and I had been married for 12 years. She was the vibrant, spontaneous force that balanced my more grounded, methodical nature. As a lawyer, I dealt in logic and evidence, but our marriage was one area where I never felt the need to apply scrutiny. Trust was our bedrock, or so I thought. That evening, I was tidying up after dinner, absent-mindedly humming an old tune, when Amanda breezed in. She was dressed unusually sharply for her monthly book club. A sleek, knee-length black dress clung to her figure, paired with heels I hadn't seen in years. Her hair fell in loose waves, and her perfume, a rich, alluring blend of jasmine and amber, lingered in the air long after she kissed me goodbye. "You look amazing," I said, trying to mask the flicker of unease in my voice. She smiled, a bit too quickly. "Thanks, Mike. Just something simple. The girls wanted to go somewhere nice this time. Don't stay out too late," I teased. She winked, grabbing her clutch. "I'll try." Once she left, I sat in the quiet, an itch of doubt gnawing at the back of my mind. It wasn't the first time Amanda's outings had stirred unease recently, but I shook off the thought. "You're overthinking things," I muttered to myself. After all, Amanda was my wife. She wouldn't. I didn't sleep well that night. When I woke around midnight, Amanda still wasn't home. I reached for my phone, tempted to call, but a text popped up just as I unlocked the screen. "Running late. Don't wait up." The words felt sterile, detached. But I forced a smile and replied with a simple, "Okay, love you." Her response didn't come until an hour later. "You too." The next day at work, I struggled to focus. My mind kept replaying moments, Amanda's laugh at something on her phone, the way she tilted her screen away when I walked by, her sudden preference for evenings out. I hated the suspicion creeping into my thoughts, but it had planted itself firmly. Things came to a head 2 weeks later. Amanda was out again, this time claiming a late-night meeting with her colleague, Brad, who I knew from her office parties. He seemed harmless, but I couldn't shake the tension building in my chest. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, pushed me to action. I fired up our shared laptop, one Amanda rarely used. As the screen flickered on, I clicked into her email, her password still autofilled, a relic of when we trusted each other completely. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I wouldn't find anything. But I did. The messages weren't explicit, not at first. Just an exchange of jokes and office banter. But the tone grew more personal, more intimate, as I scrolled through the threads. Brad wasn't just a colleague, he was someone she leaned on, shared her day with, and confided in. Then I saw it, a string of emails with subject lines like, "Tonight's plan," and "Can't wait to see you." My heart sank as I read her confirmation for a dinner reservation at a boutique restaurant downtown, one we hadn't been to in years. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. Was this innocent? A business dinner, perhaps? But I knew better. The pieces began to align in my head, a puzzle of betrayal forming before my eyes. It was then that I decided to act. I wouldn't jump to conclusions, not without evidence. My legal training kicked in. I needed proof, something undeniable. I reached out to a private investigator the next morning, a man named Grant, whose reputation for discretion was impeccable. He assured me he'd look into it, promising updates within a week. The waiting was the hardest part. Amanda's behavior didn't change. If anything, she seemed happier, more alive, which only deepened my dread. Nights passed with her, working late, while I stared at our wedding photo on the mantel, questioning everything. Then, one evening, Grant called. His voice was steady, almost apologetic. "Mike, you were right to contact me. I think you should see this for yourself." The next morning began like any other. Amanda moved around the house with her usual grace, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, while I stared blankly at the paper. The weight of Grant's words from the previous evening hung over me like a storm cloud. "I'm thinking of heading into the office a bit later today," I said casually, watching her for any reaction. She didn't even glance up. "Oh? Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just a slow morning." I took a sip of coffee, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thought I'd enjoy some time at home." Amanda smiled, but it felt distant. "Well, I won't be here long. I've got a lunch meeting downtown." "Work's been keeping you busy lately," I remarked, probing. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. "You know how it is. Year-end reviews, team projects, everyone's under pressure." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. She kissed me on the cheek and left shortly after. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone and called Grant. "Can we meet now?" I asked. My voice was sharper than I intended. "Sure. My office is open." Grant's office was small but neat, tucked into a nondescript building downtown. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his gray eyes steady. Without a word, he led me to his desk and opened a manila folder. "I'm sorry to have to show you this," he said, his tone professional yet empathetic. The first photo was innocuous enough, Amanda stepping out of our house, smiling as she texted on her phone. But the images that followed were like body blows. Amanda was seated across from a man in a restaurant, their heads leaning close, the intimate body language unmistakable. The man was Brad. The final set of photos froze me. They were taken outside a small boutique hotel. Amanda and Brad stood near the entrance, his hand on the small of her back. Then, a shot of them walking inside together. "These were from 2 nights ago," Grant said quietly. "She stayed there for 3 hours. He left first, followed by her 15 minutes later." The words barely registered. I stared at the photos, my hands trembling. It was no longer suspicion or paranoia. It was reality, staring me in the face. "Do you want me to continue surveillance?" Grant asked after a pause. I clenched my fists, the edges of the photos crumpling beneath my grip. "Yes. I need everything. Wherever she goes, whoever she meets, I need to know." He nodded. "Understood." That evening, Amanda came home as though nothing had happened. She greeted me with her usual warmth, planting a kiss on my cheek. I watched her carefully, wondering how she could move so effortlessly through this lie. "How was your day?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Exhausting," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Back-to-back meetings. I barely had time to eat." "That's rough. Did you at least get lunch?" She nodded, sliding her heels off. "A quick bite with Brad. We're working on a big pitch together." I swallowed, the bow rising in my throat. "Ah, Brad. You two seem to spend a lot of time together." Amanda looked up sharply, her expression guarded. "He's a colleague, Mike. Don't start with this jealousy thing." "Jealousy?" I forced a laugh. "I was just saying. He seems helpful." She rolled her eyes again, this time with irritation. "You're ridiculous. I'm going to shower." I watched her walk away, her words echoing in my mind. Ridiculous. Maybe I was, for trusting her so blindly, for letting this charade go on for so long. But no more. The next day, I called Grant again. "Can you track her car?" I asked. Discreetly. "Already done," he replied. "It's a standard part of the package." By Friday, he had new information. Amanda was planning another work dinner, this time at an upscale rooftop bar. Grant promised to have someone there to capture every moment. I felt a mix of anger and anticipation coursing through me. Soon I'd have irrefutable proof, not just for myself but for any future steps I needed to take. That evening, Amanda was unusually cheerful. She hummed as she got ready, wearing a red dress I hadn't seen in months. It clung to her body in a way that made my heart ache, not with desire but with betrayal. She spritzed on perfume, the scent wafting through the house like a cruel reminder of better days. "You look amazing," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Thanks," she replied, smiling into the mirror. Don't wait up. It might be a late night. Enjoy yourself, I said, my words heavier with meaning than she realized. As soon as she left, I followed. I stayed a safe distance behind her car, my heart pounding with every turn. I'd never done anything like this before, and the adrenaline coursing through me made it hard to think clearly. She arrived at the rooftop bar exactly as Grant had predicted. I parked a block away and waited. I didn't plan to confront her, not yet. But sitting there in my car, staring at the entrance where she disappeared, I knew I was nearing the edge of something. A decision was looming, one that would either shatter or redefine my life. The weekend passed in a haze of restless thoughts. Amanda maintained her usual demeanor, all warmth and cheer, but I could see it now for what it was, a carefully curated mask. Every smile, every casual laugh, felt like a calculated move to distract me from the truth. Grant's updates provided a grim clarity. On Friday night, Amanda had spent hours at the rooftop bar with Brad. Photos showed them sitting close, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as they talked, their faces illuminated by dim candlelight. It looked intimate, too intimate for coworkers. But it was what came next that stole my breath. Amanda and Brad left together, walking arm in arm to her car. I had asked Grant not to follow her home that night. I wasn't ready to see where it led. Yet now, every moment Amanda spent on her phone or away from the house felt like another betrayal. On Monday morning, Amanda kissed me goodbye, mentioning a client lunch that would take up most of her afternoon. Her tone was casual, almost offhand, but something about her words set my pulse racing. As soon as she left, I called Grant. She's out. I need to know where she's going, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Already on it, he replied. I decided I couldn't just sit and wait for updates. A surge of anger propelled me into action. I grabbed my keys and followed at a safe distance. My heart raced as her car weaved through traffic, taking a familiar route downtown. Eventually, Amanda turned onto a quieter street and slowed as a sleek black SUV approached. My stomach dropped when I saw the man at the wheel. It was Brad. They exchanged a brief look, Amanda smiling as she climbed into the passenger seat. Brad leaned over, his hand grazing her thigh as she settled in. The SUV pulled away, and I tailed them cautiously, keeping a safe distance. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. After 15 minutes of driving, they entered a stretch of suburbia I didn't recognize. The houses were large and spaced far apart, their long driveways lined with trees. Brad eventually turned into a secluded side road that led to a gated property. I parked discreetly down the street, waiting until the gate closed behind them. My heart was pounding in my chest as I debated my next move. Should I confront her now? The question played in my mind over and over. But I didn't need to act immediately. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about ensuring there was no escape from the truth. I stepped out of the car, careful not to be seen. A narrow path along the side of the road provided cover as I crept closer to the house. The driveway was long, curving toward a detached garage with its door already open. I glimpsed the SUV parked inside, Amanda and Brad stepping out together. My heart sank as they approached the car again minutes later. I ducked into the trees to avoid detection. Through the faint gaps in the foliage, I could just make out what was happening inside the vehicle. Amanda was laughing, her head thrown back as Brad leaned closer. His hand slid along her arm, then down her waist, pulling her toward him. Their movements became more urgent, their laughter giving way to something else entirely. It was happening right there, in the car, a twisted, surreal scene that felt like a dagger to my heart. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, rage and despair battling for control. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. This wasn't a suspicion anymore, this was reality, playing out before my eyes. By the time I arrived home, Amanda's betrayal had crystallized into a cold resolve. No more doubts, no more waiting. That evening, she returned home as though nothing had happened, kissing me on the cheek and asking about my day. Her casualness ignited a new fury within me, but I kept my voice even. It was fine. I replied, forcing a smile. How was the client meeting? Good, she said, hanging her coat. Brad was there, so we got a lot done. Brad. The name hung in the air between us, and I nodded, masking my anger. Later that night, as Amanda showered, I retrieved the evidence from Grant. Photos, timestamps, even a video clip from outside the bar. I placed everything in a neat pile on my desk, staring at it for what felt like hours. She would see this. She would have to. But I wasn't going to show her yet. Not until I had a plan. The next morning, I made a call to my lawyer. I'm not ready to file yet, I told him. But I need to know my options. The conversation was sobering. With no prenuptial agreement in place, the financial fallout could be significant. But I didn't care about the money. I cared about reclaiming my life from this farce of a marriage. By the end of the day, I had a strategy forming. Amanda would never see it coming. The day after my lawyer laid out my options, I sat at my desk staring at the neat pile of evidence Grant had provided. Every photo, every time-stamped report, every damning detail burned into my mind. The realization of Amanda's betrayal was no longer a wound, it was a fire, consuming everything I once thought was unshakable in our marriage. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I focused on fortifying my position. Over the next week, I began securing the details that would give me the upper hand. I called Grant, asking him to double down on surveillance. If Amanda and Brad thought they could carry on their affair without consequence, they were sorely mistaken. Keep tracking her movements, I instructed. I want to know everywhere she goes and everyone she meets. I want their texts if you can get them. It'll take time, but it's doable, Grant said. I've got time, I replied grimly. That Friday evening, Amanda mentioned she'd be working late again. I've got a big project to wrap up with Brad, she said, her voice laced with casual indifference. Don't wait up for me, okay? I nodded, feigning a calm acceptance I didn't feel. She left the house at 6:30 p.m., dressed in a sleek black outfit that left little to the imagination. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. This time, I was following her myself. Her car wound through the familiar streets of our neighborhood before merging onto the highway. She drove with purpose, heading toward the city's nightlife district. I kept my distance, watching as she navigated the streets with practiced ease. Finally, she turned into the parking garage of a boutique hotel. My stomach churned as I parked nearby, watching her figure disappear into the building's entrance. I waited, heart pounding, until nearly an hour had passed. Then, steeling myself, I got out of the car and approached the lobby. The lobby was elegant, dimly lit, and buzzing with quiet activity. Couples milled about, some dressed for dinner, others leaning close in whispered conversations. I kept my head low as I approached the reception desk. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm meeting my wife here for dinner, but I left my phone at home. Could you remind me of the room number she booked?" "Amanda Wright." The receptionist frowned slightly, typing into her computer. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose room details for privacy reasons," she said politely. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Look, I get it, but I'm just trying to surprise her. Anniversary plans, you know? She's been really stressed lately, and this is my way of making it special. Can you help me out?" Her expression softened, and after a brief pause, she nodded. "Room 402, she said. "But please don't tell anyone I helped you out." I smiled, thanking her quietly, and walked toward the elevators. The ride up to the 4th floor felt like an eternity. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears as I approached room 402. What was I doing? I had already seen the photos, had the evidence. But now, standing outside the door, I realized this wasn't about proof anymore. This was about seeing it with my own eyes. My hand hovered over the door before I finally knocked, a sharp, authoritative sound. For a moment there was silence. Then muffled voices. "Who is it?" came Amanda's voice, slightly strained. "Room service," I said, disguising my voice. I heard shuffling, hushed whispers, and then the sound of footsteps. The door opened just enough for Amanda's face to peek out, her expression immediately shifting from confusion to shock as she saw me standing there. "Mike?" she stammered, her face paling. "Hi, Amanda," I said coolly. She froze, gripping the edge of the door. Behind her, I could see Brad sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, his face equally stunned. For a moment, the three of us stood there in silence, the weight of the situation crashing down around us. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," I said finally, my voice calm but laced with venom. Amanda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Brad stood, his hands raised slightly in what I could only assume was a gesture of surrender. "Mike, this isn't what it looks like," Amanda said, her voice trembling. "Isn't it?" I stepped into the room, the door swinging open behind me. "Because it sure looks like you've been lying to me for months. Care to explain what's going on?" Brad cleared his throat. "Look, man, I think we should all just calm down." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare talk to me right now." The tension in the room was palpable, every second dragging like an eternity. Amanda looked like she was on the verge of tears, her hands shaking as she reached out toward me. "Mike, please, let's talk about this," she said. "I can explain." I laughed bitterly, stepping back toward the door. "Explain? You think there's an explanation for this?" "Mike." "No," I said sharply, my voice rising. "We're done. You'll hear from my lawyer." Before either of them could respond, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. Back in my car, the anger gave way to an overwhelming wave of sadness. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as tears blurred my vision. It was over now. Whatever Amanda and I had built together, whatever dreams we once shared, it was gone. But this wasn't the end, not for me. I was going to take control of the situation, no matter what it cost. When I woke up the next morning, it felt as though the air in the house had changed. Everything was colder, heavier. Amanda was gone, and though I didn't expect her to come home that night, her absence struck me harder than I anticipated. For all her betrayal, for all the lies, the emptiness still stung. I didn't wallow. There was too much to do. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and began writing down everything I wanted to say. Not to Amanda. I was done speaking to her directly, but to my lawyer and anyone else who would need to know the truth. Every photo Grant had sent me, every message Amanda had failed to delete from her phone, every memory of her late-night excuses, it all went into the file. If Amanda wanted to fight this, I would make sure I was prepared. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was Amanda. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally answering. "Mike," she began, her voice shaky. "We need to talk." "We've talked enough," I said coldly. "Please," she pleaded. "Not like this. Can we meet somewhere? Just to figure out what happens next." "Figure out what happens next?" I laughed bitterly. "I've already figured it out. My lawyer will be in touch." "Mike, don't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You're angry, and I get that. But don't throw away everything we've built over a misunderstanding." I clenched my jaw, my grip on the phone tightening. "A misunderstanding? I watched you cheat on me, Amanda. I saw it with my own eyes. Don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it is." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then she spoke again, softer this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I made a mistake, Mike. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. Please let me come home so we can talk." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You want to come home? Fine. But understand this, you'll come home to pack your things. Nothing else." She started to protest, but I ended the call before she could finish. That evening, I texted her, letting her know she could come by the next day to gather her belongings. I told her I wouldn't be there. I didn't trust myself to remain composed if I had to face her again so soon. Instead, I spent the day preparing. I boxed up her things, carefully dividing them from the life we had once shared. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, her favorite books, all of it went into neat, impersonal piles. But as I packed, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. The laughter we once shared, the vacations, the quiet nights on the couch, it all felt so far away, like someone else's life. By the time I was finished, the house felt even emptier. Amanda came by the following afternoon, as promised. I watched from my car down the street as she pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, looking around cautiously before heading inside. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I watched her silhouette move through the windows. Part of me wanted to storm in, to confront her one last time, to demand answers to questions I wasn't even sure I wanted to ask. But I held back. When she emerged nearly an hour later, she was carrying 2 large suitcases and a box. She loaded them into her car, paused for a moment at the driver's door, and then turned to look at the house. Even from a distance, I could see the pain etched on her face. But I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The following week, I filed for divorce. My lawyer, Sam, was as efficient as I had hoped. He outlined our strategy clearly and concisely, walking me through every step of the process. "Given the evidence you've collected," Sam said, flipping through the photos and messages, "you have a strong case. She'll have a hard time disputing any of this in court." "Good," I said. "I want this to be as quick and clean as possible." Sam nodded. "That's the goal. But be prepared, cases like this can get messy, especially if she decides to contest the terms." I nodded, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't afraid of a fight, but I dreaded the toll it might take. As the legal process began, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, taking on extra cases to fill the empty hours. My colleagues noticed the change in me, though no one asked questions. At night, the silence of the house pressed in on me. I started leaving the TV on, just for the noise. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the pain lingered. I thought of Amanda constantly. Not the woman she had become, but the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman I had believed in, trusted, and built a life with. That woman was gone now, and I wasn't sure she had ever really existed. Late one evening, as I sat in the dim light of the living room, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Amanda. "I'm sorry," the message read. "For everything." I stared at the words for a long time, my chest tightening. But I didn't reply. Amanda's apologies couldn't change what she had done. And they couldn't bring back what she had destroyed. The days following Amanda's text were eerily quiet. I thought her apology might be the last I'd hear from her, a feeble attempt at damage control before she disappeared from my life completely. But I underestimated her. 2 weeks after I filed for divorce, I was served with a counterclaim. Amanda wasn't just contesting the terms, I discovered she was going to fight for everything. When I read her demands, I nearly laughed at the audacity. She wanted the house, alimony, and half of my savings, despite being the one who had destroyed our marriage. But the most outrageous claim of all was her insistence that I had been emotionally neglectful, and that my coldness had driven her into Brad's arms. "She's trying to justify what she did," Sam said when I called him, my voice trembling with rage. "It's classic deflection. It's disgusting," I spat. "After everything she's done, she wants to paint herself as the victim?" Sam sighed. "That's how these things go. She's trying to negotiate from a position of strength, hoping you'll back down to avoid a drawn-out fight." I clenched my jaw. "Well, she doesn't know who she's dealing with." The next few weeks were consumed by depositions and meetings with Sam. He encouraged me to stay focused on the facts, to avoid letting my emotions dictate my decisions. "Judges care about evidence, not feelings," he reminded me. And evidence was something I had in abundance. Between Grant's surveillance reports and the text messages Amanda had foolishly failed to delete, there was no shortage of proof of her infidelity. When the time came to present this evidence formally, I was ready. Sam submitted everything to the court, meticulously organized and impossible to dispute. Still, Amanda didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down on her narrative, painting herself as a long-suffering wife trapped in a loveless marriage. During one particularly heated exchange in the courtroom, she claimed I had been absent for years, more focused on my career than on her. "You weren't there for me, Mike," she said, her voice trembling as though she was on the verge of tears. "I felt invisible." I stared at her, incredulous. "Invisible? You're the one who lied, Amanda. You're the one who cheated. Don't sit there and pretend this was my fault." The judge intervened, calling for order, but Amanda's words stayed with me long after the hearing ended. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from Grant. "I've uncovered something new," he wrote. "It's big. Call me when you're free." Curious, and admittedly a bit wary, I called him that evening. "You're not going to believe this," Grant said, his tone serious. "Brad isn't the only one." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I followed up on some of her movements from a few months ago," Grant explained. "There's a pattern. Late-night visits to another man's apartment. A guy named Victor. They'd been meeting on and off for about a year." I was stunned into silence. "Mike, I know this is a lot to process," Grant continued. "But I thought you'd want to know." "Yeah," I said finally. "I do. Thanks, Grant." When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Amanda's betrayal wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness, or even a single bad decision. It was a pattern, a way of life. She had been lying to me for far longer than I realized. At the next hearing, I asked Sam to introduce the evidence of her second affair. Amanda's lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed it. When the photos of Amanda and Victor were presented, her composure faltered. She looked at me, her face pale, as if silently begging for understanding. But I had none to give. "This isn't about one affair," I told the court. "This is about a pattern of deception and betrayal. Amanda didn't just cheat, she made a choice, over and over again, to destroy our marriage." The judge listened intently, nodding slightly as I spoke. Amanda, meanwhile, avoided my gaze, her bravado crumbling. After the hearing, Amanda cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Mike, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, but you don't have to destroy me." "Destroy you?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You did that all on your own, Amanda." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "You don't get to play the victim," I said, my voice cold. "Not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. As I walked away, I realized I was no longer mourning the woman I had married. That woman was gone, if she had ever existed at all. What remained was someone I barely recognized, someone I no longer cared to know. The court proceedings seemed to drag on endlessly. Amanda's attempt to paint herself as the victim grew more desperate with each hearing. Her lawyer pushed the narrative of an emotionally neglectful husband, but every time they tried, Sam countered with undeniable evidence of her affairs. The revelation about Victor had completely destabilized her case. Her lawyer tried to downplay it, calling it irrelevant and a distraction, but the judge wasn't buying it. It became clear that Amanda's strategy was to wear me down, hoping I'd cave to avoid the emotional and financial toll of a prolonged battle. But I wasn't going to cave. One afternoon, as I was leaving the courthouse, Amanda approached me. She had been avoiding direct contact since our encounter in the hallway weeks earlier, so I was caught off guard when she called out my name. "Mike," she said, jogging to catch up with me. "Please, can we talk?" I stopped but kept my distance. "What do you want, Amanda?" Her face was pale, her once confident demeanor replaced by something more fragile. I don't want it to be like this. We don't have to fight like this." I laughed bitterly. "You started this fight, Amanda. You cheated. You lied. And now you're trying to take everything from me. What exactly do you want me to do?" Roll over and let you. Her eyes filled with tears. I never meant for it to get this far. I made mistakes. Stop, I interrupted, my voice firm. Stop calling them mistakes. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of choices. Choices that destroyed our marriage. Choices that you knew would hurt me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I shook my head. It's too late for apologies, Amanda. You should focus on figuring out what kind of life you want after this is over, because we're done. Over the next few weeks, Amanda's behavior became erratic. Sam warned me that this wasn't uncommon in high-conflict divorces. She's losing control of the narrative, he explained during one of our meetings. People like Amanda, they thrive on controlling how others perceive them. When that control starts to slip, they lash out. Sure enough, Amanda began contacting me more frequently. First, it was emails filled with pleas for forgiveness. Then came the late-night texts, alternating between apologies and thinly veiled accusations. You're tearing our family apart, she wrote in one message. Our family? I muttered to myself, reading the text with a bitter smile. Amanda hadn't cared about our family when she was sneaking around with Brad, or Victor. Then, one night, I received a call from her out of the blue. Mike, she said, her voice slurred slightly. I need to see you. I frowned, checking the clock. It was nearly midnight. Amanda, what's going on? Are you drunk? I miss you, she said, her voice cracking. I miss us. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to keep my temper in check. Amanda, it's late. Go to bed. We can talk through our lawyers tomorrow. Lawyers? She scoffed, her tone suddenly bitter. Is that what we've come to? Mike, we were married for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It did, I replied coldly. Until you threw it all away. She started to say something else, but I hung up. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The next morning, I called Sam to tell him about the late-night call. She's spiraling, he said after I explained what had happened. This could work in our favor. The more unstable she appears, the better your case will look in court. Sam, I'm not looking to humiliate her, I said, though part of me wasn't entirely sure that was true. I just want this to be over. It will be, he assured me. But you have to stay patient. Let her unravel on her own. In the weeks that followed, Amanda's desperation only grew. She started showing up unannounced at my house, pounding on the door and demanding to talk. I refused to let her in, instead watching through the window as she stood on the porch, shouting accusations and pleas in equal measure. You're being cruel, Mike! She yelled one evening, her voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I know I hurt you, but you can't punish me forever. I ignored her, my heart hardened against her theatrics. After that incident, I installed a security camera at the front door and instructed Sam to request a temporary restraining order. She's not dangerous, I told him. Just unstable. Unstable can still escalate, he replied. The turning point came during our next court appearance. Amanda took the stand, her lawyer clearly coaching her to play the remorseful spouse. I know I made mistakes, she said, her voice quivering. But Mike was never present. I felt alone in our marriage. I made poor choices, but I wasn't the only one at fault. I sat there, my jaw clenched, as she tried to spin the narrative. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly, letting the evidence do most of the talking. I trusted Amanda, I said. I believed in our marriage. But she betrayed that trust, repeatedly. This isn't about a single lapse in judgment. This is about a pattern of deception and betrayal. And I refuse to be blamed for her actions. The judge listened intently, and for the first time, I felt like the tide was turning in my favor. Amanda's face was pale as she left the courtroom that day, avoiding my gaze. She had played her final card, and it had fallen flat. Amanda's attempt to sway the court had been a failure, and she knew it. After that day, her defiance gave way to something else, desperation. She stopped trying to fight me publicly and began working behind the scenes, calling mutual friends, crafting a sob story, and painting me as the villain in our crumbling marriage. I started hearing whispers. Friends who hadn't spoken to me in weeks suddenly reached out, their voices heavy with concern. "Mike, is it true you pushed Amanda to this?" one friend asked over coffee. I nearly choked on my drink. "Excuse me? She's been saying that you were cold and distant," they continued hesitantly. "That she felt neglected for years, and that's why she—" I slammed my mug down, the sound drawing a few stares from nearby tables. "Let me stop you right there," I said, my voice sharp. "Amanda cheated on me. Repeatedly. She didn't feel neglected, she felt entitled. And now she's trying to rewrite history to make herself look better." The friend looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seat. "I just thought you should know what people are saying." "Thanks for the heads up," I said tersely, standing to leave. That evening, I scrolled through social media, something I'd been avoiding since the divorce proceedings began. Sure enough, Amanda had been busy. Her profile was filled with vague, self-pitying posts about healing from betrayal and starting over after heartbreak. The comments were a flood of sympathy. "You're so strong, Amanda. Keep your head up, he doesn't deserve you. You're better off without him." I clenched my jaw as I read through them. Amanda had always been good at controlling the narrative, spinning her version of events to suit her needs. But this was another level entirely. It wasn't enough for her to try to take my home, my savings, and my dignity in court, she needed to ruin my reputation too. The next day, I called Sam. "I want to address this smear campaign," I said. "Legally, there's not much we can do about her social media posts," he replied. "But we can use it to reinforce her instability in court. Judges don't look kindly on people who air their dirty laundry publicly during divorce proceedings." "I'm not worried about the judge," I said. "I'm worried about the people in my life believing her lies." Sam was quiet for a moment. "Then you need to take control of the narrative, Mike. But do it carefully. Don't stoop to her level. Stick to the facts." I followed his advice. I reached out to close friends and family, sharing my side of the story in a measured, honest way. "Amanda and I are divorcing because she was unfaithful," I told them. "I have evidence to support this, and it's being handled in court. I just want you to know the truth, so you're not swayed by rumors." Most people were supportive, but there were a few who hesitated, clearly unsure of whom to believe. That hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I knew I couldn't control everyone's perception. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings continued. Amanda's lawyer tried to delay the process with procedural tactics, likely hoping I'd grow frustrated and agree to a settlement. But Sam and I held firm. The evidence we presented, photos, messages, financial records, was irrefutable. Amanda's affairs with Brad and Victor painted a clear picture of her betrayal, and her attempts to shift the blame onto me rang hollow. After one particularly damning day in court, Amanda's lawyer requested a private meeting with Sam and me. "My client is willing to discuss a settlement," her lawyer said, her tone carefully neutral. I raised an eyebrow. "Why the sudden change of heart?" The lawyer hesitated, glancing at Amanda, who sat silently beside her. "Let's just say we'd like to avoid further escalation." I leaned back in my chair, exchanging a glance with Sam. "What's your offer?" Amanda's lawyer laid out a proposal. She would drop her claim to the house and reduce her demand for alimony in exchange for a larger share of the savings. I laughed, shaking my head. "She cheated on me and tried to ruin my reputation. She's lucky I'm not suing her for emotional damages." "The answer is no." Amanda flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. "We'll proceed with the case," I said, standing to leave. "And when this is over, she'll get what the court decides. Not a penny more." As the trial drew closer to its conclusion, Amanda's facade began to crack. In one of our final hearings, she broke down on the stand, sobbing as she tried to justify her actions. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't mean to hurt Mike. I just..." I felt so alone. The judge listened patiently, but their expression remained neutral. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. Trust is the foundation of any marriage, I said. When Amanda cheated on me, she destroyed that trust. I didn't make her choices for her, she did that all on her own. The judge nodded, scribbling notes as I spoke. A week later, the ruling came down. The judge awarded me the house and a significant portion of our savings, citing Amanda's infidelity and her pattern of dishonesty as key factors. She was granted no alimony, and the legal fees were split evenly. It wasn't a complete victory. I had still lost time, money, and years of my life to this marriage. But it was enough. As I walked out of the courthouse for the final time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The storm was over. Amanda stood near the steps, watching me with a mixture of anger and sadness. I met her gaze briefly before turning and walking away. She no longer had power over me. The courthouse was behind me, but the weight of the past months still lingered. Even though the ruling had gone in my favor, I wasn't naive enough to think I could simply walk away and forget. Divorce wasn't just a legal process, it was an emotional reckoning. Amanda hadn't tried to reach out since the ruling, which was a small mercy. She must have realized there was no point anymore. The lies, manipulation, and attempts to rewrite history had failed. For once, I felt like I had control over my life again. But now came the hard part, figuring out what my life looked like without her. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't before. Even though Amanda had taken only a few things when she moved out, her presence, or absence, was everywhere. The space she used to occupy was like a ghost, haunting every corner. I decided to purge what remained. Anything she'd left behind that wasn't essential, I packed into boxes and donated. Her clothes, her trinkets, even the wine glasses she had insisted on buying for special occasions, they all went. It felt liberating. I threw myself into work as a distraction. Late nights at the office became the norm, and while the routine kept me busy, it didn't fill the void. Friends started reaching out, urging me to take time for myself. "You need a break, Mike," my colleague Steve said one evening over beers. "You've been through hell. Go on a trip or something. Do something for you." The idea had merit. I hadn't taken a vacation in years, not since Amanda and I had gone to Napa for our 10th anniversary, a trip that now felt tainted. A week later, I booked a cabin in the mountains. It wasn't far, just a few hours' drive, but it offered the solitude I craved. The first night, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the endless expanse of trees. The quiet was deafening at first, but slowly, it began to feel comforting. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted. Not what Amanda had taken from me, not the anger or the betrayal, but what I needed to rebuild. The realization hit me slowly. I had spent so much of my marriage compromising, bending to fit Amanda's world, that I had lost sight of who I was. When I returned home, I made a list. It was simple at first, things I'd always wanted to do but had put off for one reason or another. Reconnect with old friends. Take a cooking class, I'd always let Amanda handle that. Sign up for the gym. Travel abroad. Learn how to relax again. The last one seemed almost laughable, but it was the most important. In the weeks that followed, I started checking items off the list. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in years, and to my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. One night, I joined a few of them for a poker game. It felt good to laugh, to let go, even if only for a few hours. "You seem lighter," one of them commented. "I'm trying," I replied honestly. The cooking class was next. I signed up at a local culinary school, where I found myself surrounded by a mix of retirees, young couples, and other solo participants like me. The first class was awkward, but by the second week, I found myself enjoying it. Cooking became a therapeutic outlet, a way to create something tangible in a world that had felt so chaotic. One day, as I was leaving the class, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Amanda. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen, my emotions conflicted. Part of me wanted to respond, to lash out, to remind her of all the pain she had caused. But another part of me, the part that was healing, knew better. After a moment, I deleted the message without replying. The gym became another outlet. At first, it was more about venting frustration than anything else, but over time, it became a habit. The physical progress mirrored the emotional work I was doing, and for the first time in years, I started to feel good about myself. Eventually, I took the biggest step on my list: travel. I booked a trip to Italy, a place Amanda and I had always talked about visiting but never had. Going alone felt strange at first, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed. The winding streets of Rome, the vineyards of Tuscany, the quiet beauty of Venice, it was all a reminder that the world was bigger than the pain I had been carrying. On my last night in Florence, I sat at an outdoor cafe, sipping wine and watching the sunset. A sense of peace washed over me, one I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't fully healed, not yet. But for the first time, I believed I could be. When I returned home, the house felt different. The emptiness was no longer oppressive. Instead, it felt like a blank canvas, ready for something new. And for the first time, I felt ready to paint. Life had settled into a steady rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself rather than existing in someone else's shadow. The gym, the cooking classes, and my travels had not only kept me busy but also reminded me of my own worth. Then Amanda showed up at my door. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized. I hadn't heard from her since her last text, the one I deleted without a reply. So when I opened the door to find her standing there, her face pale and uncertain, my stomach churned with a mix of anger and curiosity. "Amanda," I said, my tone flat. "What are you doing here?" She looked down, her hands clutching the strap of her purse. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she began. "You're right about that," I interrupted. She flinched but pressed on. I needed to talk to you. Please, can I come in?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Why? We don't have anything to talk about." "Mike, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I've made so many mistakes. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to hear me out." For a moment, I considered slamming the door in her face. But something in her expression stopped me. She looked different, fragile in a way I wasn't used to. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. "5 minutes," I said, my voice cold. She stepped inside hesitantly, her eyes darting around the house as though expecting to see ghosts of our past life together. I led her to the living room and sat across from her, keeping as much distance between us as possible. "What do you want, Amanda?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I've had a lot of time to think since everything. And I realize now how badly I messed up. I let my insecurities, my selfishness, ruin something good. Something I didn't appreciate until it was gone." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "And I know I can't undo that. But I'm trying to change, Mike. I've been going to therapy. I'm working on myself." "Good for you," I said dryly. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry," she said. "For everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that." I leaned back, studying her. "You expect me to believe this is about closure? That you came all this way just to apologize?" "I mean it," she insisted. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You always mean it, Amanda. You meant it when you said you loved me. You meant it when you promised to be faithful. But somehow, your actions never matched your words." She winced but didn't argue. "I don't hate you," I said after a pause. "But I don't trust you. And I never will again. So if you're looking for some kind of redemption, you're not going to find it here." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked utterly defeated. Then she nodded, standing slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't bother you again. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you deserve better than me." I didn't respond. After she left, I sat in silence, replaying the conversation in my mind. Her words stirred something in me, but not in the way she might have hoped. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I just felt tired. The next day, I went to the gym earlier than usual, hoping to clear my head. As I ran on the treadmill, I thought about Amanda's visit. Was she truly sorry, or was this just another manipulation? It didn't matter, I realized. Her apology, whether genuine or not, didn't change anything. It didn't undo the betrayal or erase the pain. What mattered was that I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. That evening I received a message from an old college friend, Lisa. She had seen photos of my trip to Italy on social media and wanted to catch up. "Let's grab dinner sometime," she wrote. I hesitated before replying. I hadn't dated since the divorce, hadn't even considered it. But Lisa's message felt different, light, unassuming. "Sure," I replied. "Let me know when." It was a small step, but it felt significant. The night of the dinner, I felt a nervous energy I hadn't experienced in years. Lisa and I hadn't spoken in over a decade, but she had always been kind, funny, and easy to talk to. When I arrived at the restaurant, she was already waiting, her smile warm and genuine. "Mike," she said, standing to hug me. "It's so good to see you." "You too," I said, returning the smile. The evening passed effortlessly. We talked about old times, our careers, and the paths our lives had taken. She didn't pry into my divorce, and for that, I was grateful. As the night ended, I found myself smiling for real, for the first time in a long time. When I got home, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring at the stars. Amanda's visit still lingered in my mind, but it no longer weighed on me. She was my past. And for the first time, I was excited about the future. The dinner with Lisa marked a turning point. For months, I had been focused on survival, getting through the divorce, rebuilding my life, and learning how to live without the weight of Amanda's betrayal. But that evening reminded me there was more to life than just surviving. Lisa and I started texting regularly after that night. The conversations were light at first, updates about work, funny memes, and recommendations for books or shows. It was refreshing to connect with someone who knew me before my life had taken such a dramatic turn. One Saturday morning, Lisa suggested meeting at a local farmer's market. "You need to try these artisan donuts," she texted. "It'll change your life." I chuckled at the message, agreeing to meet her there. When I arrived, the market was bustling with energy. Stalls lined the streets, offering everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. Lisa was waiting by a coffee stand, holding 2 steaming cups. "Thought you could use a caffeine boost," she said with a grin, handing me one. We wandered through the market, stopping occasionally to sample cheeses or admire quirky artwork. Lisa's laughter was contagious, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself laughing too. At one point, we stopped at a stall selling succulents, and Lisa picked up a tiny plant in a colorful ceramic pot. "This one's perfect for you," she said, holding it up. "Why's that?" I asked, amused. "Because it's resilient," she said simply, her eyes meeting mine. Her words stayed with me long after the market. Over the next few weeks, our friendship deepened. We started meeting regularly, sometimes for lunch, other times for hikes or movies. I wasn't sure if it was heading towards something romantic, but I didn't feel the pressure to define it. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Lisa turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You seem lighter," she said. "Happier." "Maybe I am," I admitted. "You deserve to be," she said softly. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. Meanwhile, Amanda's presence continued to fade from my life. After her visit, she kept her promise not to bother me again. Occasionally, I heard about her through mutual acquaintances. She had moved into a small apartment across town, and was still seeing a therapist. I didn't wish her ill, but I also didn't feel the need to reach out. My focus was on moving forward, not looking back. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post from Amanda. It was a photo of her holding a certificate from some sort of life coaching program, her caption filled with optimism about new beginnings. I stared at the post for a moment, feeling an unexpected pang of something. Not sadness, exactly. More like closure. She was finding her path, and I was finding mine. Around this time, Lisa invited me to a dinner party at her apartment. It was a small gathering, just a few friends and colleagues, but the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. As the night went on, I found myself relaxing, enjoying the company and the lively conversation. At one point, Lisa's hand brushed mine as she passed me a plate, and a jolt of electricity shot through me. Later, as I helped her clean up in the kitchen, she turned to me with a shy smile. "Thanks for coming tonight," she said. "Thanks for inviting me," I replied. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged. "I'm glad we reconnected," she said softly. "Me too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Before I could overthink it, I leaned in, and she met me halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, but it sent my heart racing. When we pulled back, Lisa smiled, her cheeks flushed. "I wasn't sure if you were ready for this," she admitted. "Neither was I," said honestly. "But I think I am." The days that followed felt different. Brighter. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was building something new, something real. Lisa and I didn't rush things. We took it one step at a time, learning to navigate the delicate balance between friendship and something more. But with every laugh, every shared moment, I felt myself healing a little more. One night, as we sat on her couch watching a movie, Lisa turned to me. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not as much as I used to. Does it still hurt?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "Not anymore. It feels distant, like something that happened to someone else." Lisa nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you realize, you know." I didn't respond, but her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living, not just for myself, but for the possibility of what could come next. The scars Amanda left behind would always be there, but they no longer defined me. And as I looked toward the future, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. With Lisa, everything felt natural, easy in a way I hadn't expected. Our connection deepened with each passing day, and for the first time since the chaos of the divorce, I felt like I had found my footing. But even as I moved forward, there was one last piece of my old life I needed to address: closure, not for Amanda, but for myself. One afternoon, I found myself at the park, sitting on the same bench where Lisa and I had once talked about resilience. A cool breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm. I took out a small journal, something I had started using during the messiest part of the divorce. Flipping to a blank page, I began to write a letter, not to Amanda, but to the version of myself that had been so consumed by anger and betrayal. "Dear Mike, you made it. You survived." The words came easily after that, pouring out like a flood I didn't know I had been holding back. I wrote about the pain of discovering Amanda's betrayal, the rage I felt during the court proceedings, and the hollow emptiness that followed. But then I wrote about the growth, the healing, and the hope that had started to take root. I wrote about Lisa, about how she had helped me rediscover parts of myself I thought were lost forever. And finally, I wrote about forgiveness, not for Amanda, but for myself. "You did the best you could with what you knew at the time," I wrote. "And now you're doing even better. That's what matters." When I got home, I folded the letter and tucked it into a box where I kept other mementos from this chapter of my life. It wasn't about holding on to the pain, it was about acknowledging it, so I could finally let it go. Later that evening, Lisa came over for dinner. We cooked together, laughing as we fumbled through a new recipe we'd found online. She teased me about my inability to dice onions without tearing up, and I countered by blaming the cheap knives. As we sat down to eat, I found myself watching her, marveling at how effortlessly she had become a part of my life. "What?" she asked, catching me staring. "Nothing," I said with a smile. "Just thanks for being here." Her expression softened, and she reached across the table to take my hand. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." After dinner, we sat on the couch, a glass of wine in each hand. The conversation drifted, touching on everything from our favorite movies to our dreams for the future. "Do you think about what's next?" Lisa asked, her tone light but curious. "All the time," I admitted. "And?" I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I think whatever's next, I'm ready for it." She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Me too." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I had come. The man I was now felt worlds apart from the man who had discovered Amanda's betrayal all those months ago. I had learned to let go of the bitterness, to accept that some chapters end so others can begin. For years I had built my life around someone who didn't value it. Now I was building something new, something for myself, with someone who did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows. The house, once filled with painful memories, now felt like home again. I brewed a pot of coffee, opened the windows, and let the fresh air fill the room. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. And as I looked out at the world, I smiled. I was ready for whatever came next.